Okay, here are several different resources for you to be able to utilize as appropriate. So I have everything hyperlinked here. The first being the specialized IT services intranet page. I strongly encourage you to go on this page. It has a lot of different resources, such as different forms you might need, different resources, trainings that are IT related. We also have resources for our exemptions, for fiscal, just a little bit of everything. So just to initially familiarize yourself, it might be good to just go on there and see what's there. And then as there is a business need to revisit it, since you have the awareness of what is available there. And anything that's not there, again, feel free to reach out to me and I'm happy to help. We also have a direct link to our IT solutions request form. This is used both for non-standard requests, which is what I handle, but then also standard requests. And the distinction between the two is standard is equipment and also software solutions that are available through the ISD service catalog. And if you have any sort of general questions, feel free to reach out to us at this email below. As I mentioned about standard solutions, Gabriel and Shay are your point of contacts. And then I also included a link there to our IT service catalog, just so that you have some ease of access to see what exactly that entails. And then if you have any technical issues that are associated with existing hardware or network access, then you're going to want to go directly to ISD. And you can either reach out to them through the service desk portal, or you can email them directly, whichever your preference is. Next slide, please. All right, and there we go. So one thing I will start off by saying is if you have a solution that is IT related, whether it be a request for a project or an effort, or an IT contract, or procurement for that matter, that's non-standard, you will want to directly reach out to me. And this is even for new contracts, or if you're renewing a contract or amending a contract. If there's any sort of IT element or some form of automation, I strongly encourage that you reach out to me right away. The reason why it's most essential for the latter two items, which are like existing non-IT solutions, is because it really can derail your process if you submit your package as non-IT and it gets kicked back. And we've dealt with so many of those instances because it's kind of a moving target between what the Department of General Services and the Department of Technology is qualifying as an IT contract. And since I'm exposed to that regularly, I can help consult with you. And we can take a look and see, is this truly IT? What are you trying to achieve through your deliverables? And if maybe it's just reading, IT, we can kind of talk about like how to maybe wordsmith it so it doesn't come across that way when it gets submitted. But if it truly is IT, we want to get it on track right away because, I know a lot of folks have asked me, like, why is it so necessary to do an IT contract? And we really want to protect our data. We want to, ensure that we are following our information security protocols as a state. and protecting our programs as well. So that's why it's really important, as well. Like if you're thinking about the why for reclassifying. And so, I'll get into later the timelines. It can significantly impact your timeline. So we want to, like I said, address those as quickly as possible so that we're being planful and that we don't get down to the wire where we have any concerns of gaps in services or other things that can come up. Also, in addition to, the IT procurement protocols and, those timelines, sometimes the procurement method that has been historically used for non-IT may not work for an IT contract based on certain rules and criteria of the state contracting manual. So we may also need to solution that as well. We do have a couple of exemptions as a division that I always look at and consult with legal on, which will set us up for the best success. But we just want to be mindful that that may not always be the case that we can use those. And so that's why time is of the essence. So we do have an IT classification form that was put together from our IT contracts folks in the admin division and also in partnership with ISD. I will say it's not the end all. I think it's a good way to kind of qualify the contract and have some dialogue. But just because it may indicate that it's an IT contract doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be. So I strongly encourage that we work on that together and kind of talk through it. A lot of the times I will consult with IT contracts. Sometimes it's very clear and we can just move forward, but it seems like in the IT world, it's never, I say never, but a lot of times it's, it's not a one size fits all type scenario. So it's good to consult with our other experts just to make sure that we've all vetted and have made the best decision for the package. And then I also included a link to a document that IT Contracts and ISD also put together. And it kind of just talks about some things like what to expect when you have an IT contract. So it's kind of a nice informational resource. So I thought that would be beneficial to share with the group. Next slide, please. All right. The initial documentation, the first thing that we will do for any sort of IT contract, amendment, interagency agreement, or an IT procurement, which procurement and purchase order are kind of interchangeable. So if you think about that. So basically, if we have any of those items coming up, we'll meet together, and it is my responsibility to complete the ITSR form on your behalf. So I'll meet with you. A lot of times I'll have it primarily filled out before we meet, to review with you, make sure I've completed everything correctly. But then also there are a couple areas that I may need your support in answering since you're the expert around any of these items. And so basically, I do go through some bullets here about the purpose, but really the reason why we complete these, we used to only complete them for like IT projects and IT efforts, but we now complete them for this side of the house as well because in ISD, there's a project management office, and they use this as a tracking tool so that they know what's in the queue. They can be monitoring and tracking these, and also for prioritization. It is a key piece of kind of when we get started on your process for submitting your packages. Next slide, please. Okay, so then we also have a couple other documents. These are related to our information security documentation. The first, we tend to always refer to things as the forms, but it's the Gen 1313, which is the Information Security Review and Policy Exception Request form. This is used just for purchase orders. Well, I shouldn't say that. So it's used for primarily purchase orders or procurements. At times, if there's software built into the deliverables of the contract, it will be requested in those instances as well. But a lot of our contracts don't have that, but some of them do. And then there is also a third-party security questionnaire. This is something that's used both for IT procurement/POs and also IT contracts, amendments, interagency agreements. And it's for those non-standard instances. So there's kind of three parts to this form. First is what they qualify as an intake form. And basically, we provide some very basic information, such as the contractor manager name and email address, the contractor's name, email address, and the website. And then the stage 2 is where I work with the contract manager or contract manager's team to complete the internal part of the survey. So it goes over certain information security parameters. And then if there is like any sort of confidential or sensitive information that's being shared, that's where the contractor comes into place. So there's an external survey that's sent from CDS's Information Security and Privacy Office that will go to that contact that we identified through that intake form. And it's all automated through a portal. So the questions that we answer, as well as the questions that the contractor answers, are all done through this portal. Next slide, please. And I'm going to briefly go over the PAL or project approval lifecycle process. We don't deal with this a lot as a division. However, we have had several instances that we have. And really what it's used is it can be used for new contracts. It is primarily used for IT projects. And so we basically have to go through certain requirements or stages to get the project approved through the Department of Technology. And you can see here, I've included a couple of links in case you're kind of interested in seeing how some of these decisions are made. And also, we do have a government code of like why we do this. So I've included that as well. We can go ahead and skip to the next slide. And I would just emphasize, similar to what I mentioned about the importance of identifying these IT contracts. If it is a new contract and it does warrant the PAL process, you want to make sure that you're getting that to me as quickly as possible, because this is a very long process. Like right now, they're quoting 2 years to complete this. So I just really strongly encourage that you do connect with me when these instances happen. And so here we kind of talk about, the reasons behind is, we really want to set the foundation for the project's success. And you see a lot about like, we want to have some successful delivery. We want to make sure the foundation is set. And we want to make sure that your leadership, so our sponsor essentially, and your team's engagement is essential and part of the process. The next slide, please. And here we kind of go over the different stages of the PAL process. So it is, like I mentioned, a 4-stage process. So you have, the business analysis, alternatives analysis, so making sure we're doing our market research, looking at the solutions, and then essentially ensuring that we're ready for your project to start. So those are all very critical pieces. And you can see at the top here, there's a link. So if you want to go into more detail than what's presented here on the slide, that link will take you to the CDT website, and you can kind of see in more detail what those phases entail. The next slide, please. And so there is what's referred to as a project delegation request, which is a PDR. And we can and have done this in the past. And basically what we can do, so if we've completed stage 1, which is that initial analysis, and it seems like it's a low complexity project, we can ask if they can delegate it back to our department so that we don't need to go through the remaining 3 pieces of the PAL process. So that is an option for us. And like I said, we have done it before and been successful in doing so that we can kind of speed up the process if it's not something very cumbersome. Next slide. Okay, so I wanted to include some information here regarding certain examples of IT-related documentation that you can expect. The first is related to our purchase orders or procurements. So there's what we refer to as the AA18 form, and that is the initial requisition form. So basically, one thing that I did outline here is, the POs are used primarily for license/software orders specifically. And then in the instance where a scope is needed to support the licenses, then we would include a scope of work. So that would mean there'd be another line item with like service or maintenance. And the scope of work, so in these instances, it needs to be pretty concise. That is what makes that distinction of a scope for a PO versus like an actual services contract. And if we do have services, it always must accompany the purchase of licenses. We cannot order services as a standalone item. So that's something that we always have to be mindful of in these instances. And here I've included a resource, which is kind of a sample scope of work for a purchase order. It was provided to me through DGS, so it's something that they use. And then also similarly, there's cost worksheets. One is for a 1 year, and then very rarely, but it has happened, we do additional years. So there's the second one that I've provided for optional years is one that you can use for that. And so then we'll get into the request for contract services. And as I mentioned, this is more for those complex services that we need. And typically, they don't have licenses or software attached, but periodically they do. In this case, in lieu of the AA18 form, we will be using the Gen 704 form to accompany your package. We do, for typical packages, we do have the following items that need to be included for an IT contract, which is your scope of work, your budget detail and payment provisions, a budget summary, which this is primarily in the Excel format and must have formulas. But then second to that, for IT contracts, we also require a PDF of the budget summary. And then a budget narrative must accompany that as well. And that's also for all packages, we need a budget narrative. And I mentioned that because Lauren and her team will kind of get into some distinctions between IT contracts and non-IT contracts and IT contracts. And so there are a few different things, but it's primarily the same submittal, but there's a couple of nuancy things for IT. And then also, you'll want to include a spending plan or spending plans. Sometimes there's more than one. If you're using local assistance, there's also a contract grant checklist that's required. And then you'll also do the payee data or submit the payee data record. And then what I complete on your behalf are the remaining items. So there is the certification of compliance with IT policies. That is used for both IT contracts and IT procurements or POs. And then there's also a SIMS 22B, which is the commercial off-the-shelf software as a solution acquisition form. And that's only used when there's, as it kind of spells out here, software licenses. And both of those do have dollar thresholds, and I monitor that for you as to when they need to be completed. And then there's also the ITAP request itself and the AIO summary, which is our agency, the agency information officer summary. So when we do an ITAP request, we do include a summary. So there's a template that I fill out with relevant information that we want to provide as kind of a high-level overview of your package to agency for them to review and essentially approve your package. Next slide, please. Okay, perfect. So there are Gen AI forms that need to be completed with any IT contract or procurement. Actually, it also is relevant to the non-standard, I'm sorry, I'm saying non-standard, but I mean to say non-IT side. And it's in the instance, so non-IT is a little bit different, but for IT, it's for all instances. And basically we start with the STD 1000 form. And it's basically kind of your intake form is kind of the best way I would describe it. So basically, the contractor fills out their information. They will answer whether or not they're using Gen AI. If it's no, then it's kind of a one and done. They just sign and date it. If it's yes, then there are 6 subsequent questions that they'll need to complete and then sign and date it. It also triggers the Gen AI risk assessment form, which is that SIM 5305F form. And there's a privacy threshold assessment that also goes along with that. And this is where our information security office will take a deep dive into how they're actually using Gen AI technology to support your deliverables. And they will identify if the risk is low, moderate, or high. If there is Gen AI technology being used, it will subsequently go to CDT for their review and approval as well. So it can tend to be a pretty long process. Right now, there's been some additional requirements, probably as of less than a month ago. So we're still learning about how that might impact our packages and ensuring that we backdate our timelines accordingly so that we don't run into any issues with the execution of your packages. Um, and one thing that I would just emphasize is if your contractor is using Gen AI technology, if it's something that you're not specifically procuring or requiring as your deliverables, to talk to the contractor about it and see, is it something that you absolutely need to support, or is it more of a nice to have? And if it's a nice to have, you may want to consider um, asking the contractor if they can, not use or turn off that Gen AI technology if you're concerned about your timeline and you're not seeing a benefit in using this technology. Of course, if it is beneficial, definitely, feel free to go down the path. But I just mentioned that there are options if you are concerned about your timeline to have some of those conversations. Next slide, please. Okay. So here we have the ITAP step-by-step instructions that were put together by ISD, so feel free to look through those. I've included the link at your convenience. And what I'll just mention to you kind of high level is that through the ITAP process, there's a few layers. So once you have your package completed, and we typically will work on the preliminary IT documentation ahead of time. So once you have your actual package to me, we will prepare it to submit for the ITAP, which is the Information Technology Acquisition Plan submittal. And initially, when you submit your package, I will review it to make sure all the components are there that should be there. And then, as Lauren indicated earlier, I will submit your package to her and her team essentially to do a really deep dive into the different pieces of your package. Most of the time, they will come back with feedback as to suggested or recommended edits. And then at that point, I will send those your way. I'll review them first, send them your way, and then we'll ask that you take a look and make the necessary changes. And then at that point, I complete a couple of extra IT documents, package everything together, and then officially submit it for the ITAP. And the ITAP is a monthly process. So there are deadlines. So as we're working on your package, I'll let you know I need it by X date so that we can complete these preliminary steps before submitting your package and ensuring that we get it to ISD before the cutoff. So once the cutoff for the ITAP process starts, so meaning ISD's cutoff, then it is a 2-month process for approvals. And that's why I include these step-by-step so that this wasn't always available. And I think this is really helpful to have a visual because when one says it's 2 months, it's like, why does it take so long? And I think they've done a great job of explaining, all the hands that have to touch this and how long each area has to review and approve or do whatever they need to do with the package. So just want to make mention of that. And then also, I should have mentioned, and I'll mention now, that Lauren's team only reviews the IT contracts. I handle the procurements and POs solely myself. So And those are usually more straightforward as the review goes. And then the other thing I will mention about the ITAP, which is a little bit different for IT contracts, is part of that 2-month time frame is also including budgets approval and their completion of the budget review sheet, or you may hear the acronym BRS. With the non-IT side, that happens after you submit the package when it's over in the non-IT contract side. It happens on the front end with these approvals before it makes its way over to IT contracts. Okay, so we can move to the next slide. And then here we have some timelines. So for renewals, I like to plan at least 9 months. And that is for us to be able to complete our IT documentation, for the ITAP approvals, and then also we do have to receive a budgetary quote before submitting your package for the ITAP. And so sometimes it takes a very long time, like months, for vendors to get back to us on quotes. So that's why I start as soon as possible. And then also we want to take into consideration that we want to allow our IT purchasing folks, I try to give them 3 months for having our package in the queue. So basically, once I have all the approvals that are needed for your package, then I enter it into FisCal. So that's kind of the trigger for IT purchasing. So I want to make sure that I have everything 3 months prior to the renewal, or 3 months prior to, like, if we have a new procurement, for them to be able to process this. That allows ample time. And then for IT contracts, we want to plan on at least a year. Now, that means that you should be already engaging with the contract before that 1 year. Best practice is to be having conversations about your scope of work, about your budget, all those things before that 1 year time frame. And I strongly encourage you for those that are newer to this, not to look at your scope of work as status quo. Really go in and look and make sure everything's still relevant. If there's anything that needs to be enhanced, even if it's going to be very similar to the prior contract, because a lot of times it's very obvious when someone doesn't do that, because there's things that are outdated or not relevant anymore. So it's a really good time to kind of just take a second look at that and just make sure everything is current, and representing what you're wanting to achieve with the contractor. And then if it's a possible reclassification, and this is why it's really important too that you start working with your contractor before that 1 year time frame. So if maybe you've gotten lucky. No, I say that jokingly, and it hasn't been caught yet that there are actually IT elements, or there's some automation in your contract. You may look at it at its renewal and realize that, ooh, this might be IT actually. It's best that you start identifying that as quickly as possible. Or, I know a lot of contracts, I say a lot, but I've been seeing an uptick of contracts where there may be some work related to our CARES project that's in there. And depending on what it is, and not all CARES requires an IT contract, but if it's like migration of data, or like helping with any sort of technicalities, it very likely is going to get reclassified. And so we want to be planful about that. And then also, as the rules continue to change with DGS and CDT, you may want to make sure that nothing that is in there now, actually that's been in there historically, is now being looked at as IT. I mean, there's been different trends, like LMSs, so learning management systems, hotlines, business analytics that weren't once considered IT that are now. And so things like that, we just want to make sure that we're working on that as soon as possible, and really identifying those. Now, if you do have an RFI, which happens on a rare instance, we want to plan on at least 6 months for those. The reason is that it has to go through multiple hands before it is posted, because IT contracts essentially will look at it, ISD, and then they also send it over to the Department of Technology to review. And it really just depends on, you know, people's workload, you know, how quickly they're going to be able to turn it around. And a lot of times, you know, obviously we don't have a good pulse on CDT until we send something over there. And also ISD can be a moving target. So we just want to make sure to plan as much time as possible for those. And then for new IT requests, we don't have a definitive time frame. It really depends on the level of complexity, whether it's looked at as an IT effort or an IT project. And the IT projects are those that are more complex and require more effort on the technical team side, whereas an IT effort tends to be something that's more like maintenance and operations related, but maybe is an enhancement to something that already exists. And then timelines above. So the timelines above are strictly for the contracts process, but if there's any Gen AI technology involved, it will be impacted. Before I was quoting around 6 months, but because of some new requirements, it could potentially be going like to 9 months to a year. You know, don't quote me, but I'm just kind of, to my best ability, giving you a guesstimate, because until we start seeing a trend as a department, we really don't have a definitive answer on that. And let's go to the next slide. So I know I went over a lot, and I admit that I will not be quizzing you afterwards. Thankfully, you'll have the slide deck and my contact information to look at following this presentation. But I do want to open it up for questions to see how I may be able to assist you in this live forum. And I'll look at the chat too, just to see if there's any, because I heard it going off while I was chatting, but I didn't want to get distracted with that.
There are no questions in chat.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you everyone.
You did that good of a job.
Wow. That's nice to hear. No, I'm just kidding. All right. So I will go ahead and hand this over to the non-standard IT team. Or I keep saying non-standard. I apologize. The non-IT team. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen. So to start, we're going to go over just some of the non-IT contract processes. Some of this is covered in our later presentations, so I will be skipping a couple of slides to, well, I won't go as in depth because some of it will get covered in the other presentations. But this, what you can see on the screen is just your basic package. So under $50,000, just a general state operations package, your Gen 704, your scope of work that defines the roles of your contractor and between the contractor and us as CDSS, a budget summary, making sure that the budget summary, the amounts are rounded to the nearest whole dollar. They do not have to be, but we do have a training next week that covers more in depth of the budget summary if you all would like to join. And it needs to be on an Excel spreadsheet, and the line items should match what's within the scope of work. The contract grant checklist is a required document from budgets and accounting. Essentially, what this covers is any contractor needs for a 1099. And then also it serves as a very basic checklist for making sure that the package is completed, including making sure the Gen 704 is there. We have a scope of work, a budget summary, or a narrative, which we'll go over, and the spending plans. The STD 204 is how we pay the contractor. So that's just information that's sent over to the Secretary of State, just making sure that that information does match what's on the Gen 704, so that prompt payment can be made when the contract's processed. I won't go into the STD 1000 because Kathleen did cover that, but that is required for all contract packages, excluding receivables or interagency agreements. But it is required for interagency agreements that have subcontractors on it. Oops. There we go. So contracts with local assistance funding and subvention agreements. Based on the state contracting manual, these are agreements that provide assistance to local governments and aid the public directly through an intermediary. To determine if your contract qualifies, we do recommend that you do go through the ITAL GovQA process, which we'll cover that a little bit later. For these types of agreements, this is where a budget narrative is required. The line items need to match what's within the budget summary, and then what's included there is a narrative describing what each line item is. So if you have a personnel line item, basically it's going to describe the positions and what those positions are doing on a very high level, similar to if there's traveling or consulting or anything like that. That's where those items come in place. The other requirement is that we don't have to have dollar amounts on our budget narratives. And the reason for that is if we're going to go do an amendment, it's way easier to just only have to update the dollar amounts on the budget summary than making sure it's done on both, especially if something's miscalculated on the budget summary and we copy it over to the budget narrative, then you're trying to update two documents at the same time. So contracts did clarify with us that we don't have to have dollar amounts on the budget narrative. The exempt from competitive bidding, there are many different exemptions in place just with the state contracting manual. Local assistance and subvention agreements are exempt from competitive bidding, and that's detailed in Volume 1, Section 5.80. The additional requirements for a budget summary, if there are personnel items within the contract, then that needs to be calculated with their classifications and then the amount of hours that they're going to be working towards for the contract based off their salary. And then also indirect costs. This link goes to the memo, but it has to be 25% or less of the direct expense or the direct costs of the contract. The spending plan needs to be updated. Because it's a local assistance agreement, there will be a spending plan for the funds that have to be pulled. And the amounts listed on the Gen 704 and budget summary need to match the spending plan exactly. So if you use whole dollars on your budget summary and the Gen 704, whole dollars are used on the spending plan, and vice versa. If you use cents, then cents need to be used in both places. If a contract, local assistance funding, is not located, definitely reach out to our budget analyst, Ashley, and she would be able to help kind of figure out where it is or if we need to get one created for the funding source. I won't go in depth here, but this is the package for and the requirements for amendments to agreements that are executed. One thing I want to make sure I note is that any changes made to the exhibits, so our scope of work or budget summary or our budget narratives, need to be bolded and underlined if we're adding new information. And then we have to do a strike through for removing language or information. So if we're adding funding for a fiscal year, then we need to bold that fiscal year and bold those new numbers in there. If we're moving funding between fiscal years, then we need to strike through those original numbers to get the new, whatever those new contract numbers are. And the changes that are made to the exhibits are only implemented based on the most updated exhibits. So if you're on Amendment 2, your original numbers on Amendment 2 will be from Amendment 1. And we'll cover that too in our training next week as well. And then, like I said, the rest of these are we'll cover mostly in our next presentation. Some other miscellaneous contract items are resumes. So if we have contracts that are consulting agreements, resumes are required, and the key personnel should be noted within the budget summary and budget narrative. We'll want to consult with we'll want to consult with the contracts team to see if we need to have the key personnel noted there. Sometimes it's not always a requirement, especially for independent contractors. But it's just best to make sure we talk about it and see what's actually required. University agreements do require a resume as well. The agreements link, it's linked twice here, but we have to make sure we also use templates that have been agreed upon between the state and the universities. And by universities, it's UCs. We want to make sure we utilize those templates. We did just create an Excel version of the AB20 template for the budget summary. And that is going to go through ADA compliance before we get that posted to our SharePoint site. But we'll be sure to share that in our May email to everybody. The contract expedite justification memo. This is required for any contracts that are submitted less than 90 days to the team or to the contracts team before it needs to be executed. It's also required, there's a deadline that the contracts team puts out every year for contracts that need to begin on or before July 1. Any contracts that are submitted after that date have to have a contract expedite justification. If I remember correctly, it was sometime in February was the deadline this year. So any contracts submitted here forward for July 1, that need to start July 1, February 10th, need to be accompanied by a contract expedite justification. What that includes is a justification on why it's submitted late, how we'll prevent it in the future, and then it has to be signed by Angie. But to remember to keep in mind that when we do these, that it does put other contracts on the back burner because we're requesting an expedite and asking the team to focus on, and by team, I mean the contracts team, to focus on this contract and getting it executed as quickly as possible. I'll touch lightly on printing exemptions, but if there is any printing within your contract, it has to be done by the printing team, or we need to have a printing exemption so that we can say that we can print it ourselves. That process is lengthy, so I do encourage that you have that conversation up front with the vendor so that that's not addressed while the contract's in process, because you have to go through an entire approval process for it. Service orders, this is pretty straightforward. This is all of the information you need for to get it submitted. The one thing I'll note for these is that it is a Gen 1371. That includes everything essentially that you need. It's a little more thorough than the Gen 704 as well, but we do have to pull information we don't pull for a contract, including the Secretary of State registration and the SAM registration. If we're using federal funding, we use the SAM registration. And then if it's not exempt from competitive bidding, then we do need to reach out or have quotes from 3 other vendors to make sure that that's covered in the that we covered our basis for the pricing, to making sure that we're within market pricing. but legislative exemptions do apply to this. If we need to utilize the CCR exemption or the FFPS exemption. Oops. Um, ITAL and Cal Branch. So highly recommend. I found it beneficial working with ITAL or Cal early on in a development of the contract, especially new contracts where we have new policies or anything like that, to making sure that we submit them for review. They're really quick too. They don't really, it doesn't take a month. They do take the 2 weeks if we need it, or if we request an expedite, they're really good about making sure that our needs are met there as well. But what the benefit is in submitting it to iChal and Cal is that we do get we get any concerns completed upfront or dealt with upfront, and then they can assist with any contracting policy reviews and any children policy reviews that we need of our scope of work or the rest of the package. The If your renewal contracts or amendments have a significant change to the scope, I would also recommend that it goes through the ITAL or Cal review as well. And then I did link here the GovQA portal, but I just wanted to make sure that everybody understands how important it is. I understand sometimes things come up last minute, but if we do rush through the process and don't do these things, all that's going to happen is we're going to get caught up in the Gen 944 review when it comes time. So the non-IT contracting process, if a contract is awarded from a solicitation or exempt from competitive bid, we can begin building our package. Program develops a package and required documents to prepare for the non-IT contracts bureau and our admin division. If needed, our team can complete a review. We do it for IT contracts on Kathleen's behalf, but if you have a non-IT contract that you need help with, or even just portions of the contract that you want us to check, we can do that. And our typical turnaround, depending on workload, is 1 to 2 days, but we'll always communicate if it's any longer or if we can do it the same day. One item I want to make sure I emphasize today is that we have to submit completed packages to non-IT contracts. What has happened in the past is that we're piecemealing information to the contracts and budgets team. And the problems that come up with that is when we're piecemealing, we're adding a bunch of emails to their inbox. So things get missed, but also they might not have the most updated version if we're not sending them the most updated version. Budgets will return a package if it's not completed, which then in turn delays your agreements. So making sure that when we're getting ready to submit a package, and that's just for the sake of your time as well, that it is the full completed package. Budgets review takes 10 days. So once you submit it to the non-IT inbox, it goes to the Budgets Bureau, and they can take 10 days. Budgets might correspond with you if there's any questions they have or any concerns or if anything needs to be addressed. Our team does help in that process as well, but making sure that we are responsive so that we meet the 10-day timeline that they're supposed to be on. Once Budgets does review it, it does go to the contract, back to the non-IT Contracts Bureau for packaging. Once they build the package and they ask program any questions, it goes out to Gen 944 review. And that review is of the contract, sent to program, ISD, legal, and RAD, and anyone else to make sure there's nothing that needs to be addressed. And then all we need to do to sign off is what I recommend, is to make sure that the 204 matches the address on the contract. If that doesn't match, then we run into problems at post-execution with making sure that the agreement, that the contractor is going to get paid for their services. Making sure that the contract manager contacts are accurate, because I know sometimes people move around. And then any billing information is accurate as well within Exhibit B. Once the review is completed, the contracts analyst in the non-IT Contracts Bureau completes the review. and then it routes the contract for the contractor's signature. Once we get that back, it is routed to CDSS for signature. There are requirements where it has to go to DGS for approval, which then extends the execution date, but at times that's not the case. So, or a lot of our contracts don't have to go to DGS, a very small amount do. But otherwise, if it doesn't have to go to DGS, then it is executed. Once it's executed, the analyst will send the contract manager the memo and to the contractor to make sure we specify the what's needed to make sure that the contract's paid on time and managed properly, and we go from there. Just to cover basics for the hard start date, if your contract is supposed to start July 1, 2025, but it's executed August 20th, 2025, your start date is still July 1, 2025. This doesn't apply to all contracts. What this does apply to are interagency agreements, your legislative exempt contracts, so FFPS or CCR agreements, and any local assistance contracts as well. This is one too, if you have questions to see if your contract does qualify for a hard start date, you can also consult with ITAL on those items to make sure that it qualifies for your legislative exempt contracts and all of those good, all of those things. Just some quick additional resources. There was a budget training that was given, I think 2 years ago, and that's linked here to that PDF. The learning management system does have their legal academy, which is done by ITAL, and it goes over scopes of work, the GC 1930, and all of those things. I do recommend anybody attends those as you can. It is a live training. There is a non-IT contract type training if you just want to understand the non-IT contract types. And I just discovered we don't have the Excel training anymore. So we can't do that. But we will go over some Excel things next week in our budget summary training. Our SharePoint site, which is linked up top, does have a lot of resources, including all the forms you need for a contract package. That's where all of our links go to. So I would say if you haven't already, I would mosey through the link just to see what we have. If you see anything that you think would be beneficial, definitely let us know. At the end of the day, you all are the ones in the forums all the time. So this does just cover what's required for a non-IT contract or an IT contract and an amendment. Just a quick sheet. I would just save, if you save the PowerPoint, save this as a separate link so that you understand what is required. It does change, but any changes, like I mentioned, will be communicated to everybody. Any questions? All right. If there are none, let's plan on coming back at around 10:11, and we'll get started on our next portion of our presentation. Thanks, everybody.
Good morning, everybody. This is Amelia, one of the Contract Coordination Unit's analysts. Welcome. We appreciate you taking the time to join us today to discuss contract renewals. During this presentation, if you have any questions, you can drop them in chat, or we will open it up at the end for any questions. Next slide, please. Next slide, please.
Hold please, technical difficulties.
No worries. This contract renewals training will cover what is a contract renewal, items to consider, funding considerations, CFSD expiration reports, contract renewal documents, submitting a contract renewal, and best practices. Next slide. What is a contract renewal? A contract renewal is a contract that's completed before an existing contract expires, so contract services may continue with a new term. An example would be a contract we renewed with the Evident Change with a July 1st, 2020 through June 30th, 2022 term and was due to expire. Both parties wanted to continue the services, so a contract renewal was completed and submitted so that the services could continue with a new term of July 1st, 2022 through June 30th of 2024. While a renewal will provide a new term, there can be changes made to the original scope of work and funding as well. Please be mindful if your contract is exempt from competitive bidding, you want to ensure any changes made to the contract still qualify for the exemption. You can reach out to the Information Technology and Administrative Litigation, also known as ITAL, at their Legal Services Request portal. Next slide. A few things you'll want to consider if you plan on renewing the contract. Funding. Very important. Please make sure that funding is available for the renewal. You'll want to do this early and ensure it is available before moving forward with creating the renewal package. And we'll dig in deeper on this in the coming slides. Are there changes to the services? Will these changes in services be viewed as IT and possibly be reclassified? If you believe they may be, please reach out to Kathleen Clues to discuss further. Also, reviewing the entire scope of work to ensure that the overall goal is still relevant to the renewed contract. And then also important, competitive bidding. Most of our contracts utilize an exemption and are exempt from competitive bidding. But in case that you want to renew a contract that was competitively bid, then the contract will have to undergo another solicitation for services to continue. Now, this process can be very lengthy, so please be aware of all timelines and review the SCM section 5.81 for competitive bidding requirements. Next slide. Funding considerations. After deciding to renew a contract, the first thing you want to do is check funding. There's no point in building a complete package if there's no funding. A couple of things you'll want to ask yourself are, how much funding is required for the contract renewal? For example, after communicating with the contractor, will fees stay the same or will additional funds be needed? Now, once you determine or confirm funding, you will need to speak with the spending plan monitor to ensure that funding is available. Now, another question is the funding coming from the same place? If not, where is it coming from? Can funding be reduced for the renewal due to unused funds? Once you determine the amount of funds needed and where it's coming from, you can reach out to see availability. For local assistance funds, please communicate with the appropriate spending plan monitor from the list found at the link shown here to determine if the funds are available. For state operations funds, please reach out to the operations unit at the emails shown here. Next slide. The Contracts Coordination Unit team updates and tracks all contracts on our expiration reports, but the contract managers are responsible for keeping track of expiration dates and working proactively to avoid delays of services. Now, to avoid delays, you can begin discussions for non-IT contracts at least 9 months ahead of the expiration date and around 12 to 15 months before the IT contracts expire. We have provided a link here to our expiration reports, and we do send quarterly reminders of upcoming expiring contracts. Please note that most of our CFSD contracts expire on June 30th of each fiscal year, and the Contracts and Procurement Services branch issues a renewal submission deadline within the third quarter of the state fiscal year. This year's submission deadline was February 10th, so please plan on getting your renewals in prior to that submission date, as anything after that deadline will require a contract expedite justification. Next slide. Here we will discuss what documents are required for a renewal. Typically, the renewal will require the same documents as the original contract. And here on this slide, we have a Gen 704, which we have linked to a blank PDF. Exhibit A, also known as the scope of work. And this is required whether services are changed or not. If no changes to services, please make sure all the other applicable information is updated. Exhibit B, Attachment 1, also known as a budget summary, which needs to be in Excel format. Now, for IT contracts, as Kathleen mentioned, you'll need to provide an Excel version along with a PDF version. And then we have the Exhibit D, Attachment 2, also known as the budget narrative, and that's applicable to local assistance subvention contracts. And for local assistant renewals, you'll want to make sure to have your renewal contract added to the appropriate spending plan or plans, and provide a link to the spending and a link to the spending plan in your submission email. Next slide. And here we'll talk about contract renewal documents. Continued. The contract grant agreement checklist needs to be included with your Gen 704 package, and it needs to be signed by your branch chief. The STD 204 pay data record. Please confirm with the contractor that there are no changes to their name or information. If no changes, then the original signed STD 204 may be used. And then the next form here, we have an STD 1000, also known as the Gen AI. This is filled out by the contractor. If you receive an STD 1000 back from the contractor indicating that they're using any type of AI, you'll want to communicate with Kathleen Clues as soon as possible so she can review and determine the next steps. This form is not required for receivable or interagency agreements. And next slide. And now I will hand it off to my coworker, Jeb. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Jeb Goad, and I'm going to go ahead and continue the training here. Let me pull this up. Submitting a contract renewal. Submitting a renewal will be the same as submitting the original contract. You will complete the Gen 704 package, making sure to have all necessary documents and that all documents are accurate, including all vendor forms such as the STD 204 and the STD 1000. You may reach out to us, as Lauren said earlier, for a Gen 704 package quality check before sending for signatures and submitting. Once sending for a branch chief signature, please follow your branch's internal process and double check that all required signatures are obtained. The Gen 704 must be signed on page 1 and page 3, and the contract grant checklist will also require a signature. Next slide. When you are ready to submit your renewal package, you will submit all non-IT contracts to the non-IT submission email shown here, and all IT contracts will be submitted to Kathleen Cluse at the email shown here. Next slide. Shown here is an example of a non-IT contract renewal that is being submitted. You will notice that all the required documents in the attachments. The subject line states Gen 704 contract renewal package for North Fork Rancheria Tribe ICWA Conference. In the body of the email, you will notice that we mention again that this is a contract renewal and list the vendor and the purpose of the contract. Under that, you will see we have listed all the attached documents and have also linked which spending plan the contract is listed on. Doing all this ahead of time for your email will help budgets, it'll help contracts, it'll help everybody speed along the process and make it a much smoother process. Next slide. Best practices. All right. We recommend beginning the non-IT contract renewal process at least 9 months before the original contract's expiration date. You will hear us mention the word early a lot because it is vital to resolve any issues or possible delays before the recommended submission time. Communicate with the vendor as early as possible about renewing. Talk about deliverables, rates, and any possible rate increases to ensure that the funding is available. Be proactive when it comes to preparing the documents and have the required documents completed early. Also, once a decision is determined to renew a contract and funding is confirmed, have the appropriate spending plans updated for the contract renewal with the contract amount and add TBD for the contract number. Next slide. Competitively bid renewals. Again, we don't run into this often. Still, if you need to renew a competitively bid contract, the solicitation needs to be updated 1.5 to 2 years prior to the contract expiration. You need to consider what needs to be added based on the evaluation of the contractor services. The solicitation should be posted at least 1 year prior to the expiration and should be submitted to the contracts team 90 days prior to the required posting date. This is for non-IT contracts only. Also, if applicable, it is recommended on working towards getting the services approved for its own legislative exemption to allow for timely execution of future agreements. Next slide. Shown here are, again, some super helpful resources. If you plan on working on renewals or just contracts in general, we recommend saving these. We have our CCU SharePoint, the Specialized IT Services SharePoint, and CPSB's non-IT contract SharePoint. Next slide. We have linked, as Lauren mentioned earlier, the Budget Bureau contract trainings here, and have also linked, here are a few relevant chapters of the state contracting manual. And lastly, we have provided a link to a sample CDSS contract manager memo. Next slide. And that completes our training on contract renewals. At this time, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to ask. Our email is always open as well. So if you prefer to ask questions there, shoot us an email. If you guys like Teams, feel free to reach out to me or Amelia or Lauren if you have any questions. We're always here to help. But yeah, if you have any questions, shoot. Not, then we'll go ahead and move on to the amendment training. All right, welcome back, everybody. Thanks for joining today. We have created this PowerPoint training to help provide a better understanding of contract amendments, things to consider, hurdles in the process, what is required, and also submitting an amendment. If you have any questions, we will be monitoring the chat, and if we'll try to answer, but we will open it up at the end for questions as well. So next slide. What is a contract amendment? The State Contracting Manual, SCM 3.09, provides the definition for a contract amendment as a formal modification or change of material term, such as the term, cost, or scope of work in one or more provisions of an existing contract. Next slide. There are items that you want to consider before you attempt to amend a contract. The SCM has strict guidelines and requirements when it comes to amendments. We will touch on each of these below in the following slides. We have linked sections of the SCM throughout the presentation and we'll touch on each section, but please read through the entire section of the SCM if it does apply to your contract amendment, so you can fully understand the guidelines and requirements. Next slide. This section will go over DGS approval and when it is needed and not needed for amendments. For example, if the original contract was subject to DGS approval, then the amendment will as well, unless it only extends the contract for completion of services for a period of 1 year or less. This can only be used one time. Even if you are using this extension and it is exempt from DGS approval, then you will still need to send an executed copy of the amendment and the STD 215 explaining the reason for the extension to DGS. However, if the original contract was not subject to approval and the amendment makes it subject to approval, then obviously it'll need to be sent for approval to be approved by DGS. We have linked sections of the SCM here if you'd like to read and like more information on this. Next slide. This section, again, we've said it many times, doesn't apply to most of our contracts, as most of them utilize legislative exemptions or meet the CDSS funding thresholds. As a rule of thumb, once a competitively bid contract, always a competitively bid contract. But there are 3 exceptions to this. A competitively bid contract can be amended under one of these 3 circumstances. Number 1, the contract provides for a particular type of amendment. It can't just be merely just a statement saying that we can amend. And the additional years and additional tasks were anticipated and evaluated in the invitation or bid or request for proposal. So pretty much that's saying if you want to amend under that circumstance, then it needs to be written into the RFP or the IFB. Or the amendment does one, but not both of the following, and there are no changes to the statement of work. It adds time to complete performance, no more than a year, as said earlier, and the amendment adds not more than 30% of the original contract, not to exceed $250,000. Number two, amendments to existing contracts under the same terms and the same lower rates where a protest or other legal action delays the award of the new contract. And the third way is amendments to an existing contract to correct incidental errors. Again, this is just a summary of the situation, but the SEM provides a much more elaborate explanation of the guidelines. If you do run into the situation, we strongly advise that you visit the SEM at these links in these sections to read more about it as well. Next slide. If adding funds, you want to make sure that the funds are available before amending. If using local assistance funds, please contact the spending plan monitor to discuss available funds. Here is the link to the spending plan monitor list. And if you're using state support, please contact the CFSD Central Operations Unit at the listed email to confirm funding is available. Also, you want to make sure that you can extend the contract. Generally, contracts should not exceed 3 years, but can be extended with substantial written justification for a longer term based on business reasons, or an exemption to extend past 3 years, or an exemption to extend past 3 years. You can read more about this in section 7.80 of the State Contracting Manual. Next slide.
I'm going to jump in real quick on that slide just for a second. One other item that we recently discussed with budgets too about funds and amendments is also making sure when we're moving funds between fiscal years that we are discussing with our accounting partners before we submit the package. Because what happens is if we've expended to a certain amount, but we're trying to move the remainder, we need to make sure that the remainder that we have matches what accounting has, so we don't have any hiccups in the future. So just wanted to make sure I pointed that out. And we're going to cover that in our training next week too, but I think it's important to note today. Thank you.
Thank you. Next slide. Okay, exemptions. If the original contract is utilizing an exemption, then you will need to make sure to ensure that the amended contract is still within the scope of the exemption. And if you are extending the term of the contract, that the exemption will still be active throughout the remainder of the amended term. We have linked the different exemptions here and linked the SEM reference to statutory exemptions and DGS approved exemptions. Next slide. This section explains what documents are required for amendments and when they are submitted. These aren't like new contracts or renewals. They work a little bit different. A new Gen 704 and STD 215 will always be required for every amendment, regardless of the reasoning for amending. There is an amendment section on the Gen 704 that needs to be completed that we will go in and show you and discuss later. So pretty much if changing only funding and not changing services, then you only need to submit the documents that were changed: the budget summary, the budget detail, payment provision, contract grant checklist. Anything that has the changed funds on it will need to be submitted. And the same goes for changing services. So if not changing funding and only changing services, then only the documents that were changed need to be submitted: the statement of work, the STD 1000, budget narrative, anything that has the changed of services on them. We have listed the documents here and the reasons they would need to be submitted for your reference. And with that, I believe I am passing it over to Amelia. She's going to handle the rest of the training. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeb. The Gen 704 for amendments. So we'll go in and talk about the Gen 704 must be fully completed with all amendments, just as the original contract. You want to make sure to fill out all the amendment sections shown here in red. Now, section 1, you will mark yes, this is an amendment, and no, this is not a renewal. In section 2, please enter the contractor's name and contract number in this section. In section 3, you'll want to enter the contract term for amendments. Please enter the original contract start date, that won't change, and the revised end date. Please double check that the end date is within the allowed period of the contract. Next slide. In section 4 includes the amendment effective date, and it's when the amendment will begin. The effective date of the amendment can be specified without affecting the contract period. Amendments must be entered into before the expiration of the original contract. That is very important. In the amount of increase or decrease, you won't include the contract total, just the increase or decrease. And then you'll enter the current original contract amount in that section, labeled the same current original contract amount. And the revised contract total, that is the original contract amount plus or minus the amended amount. You'll see by the arrows that the amount of increase plus the current contract amount equals the revised contract amount. And in section 5, state fiscal years, please include all years of the contract. Sometimes some contracts will list additional years. You could include a box and include like state fiscal year for the, let's see, we have 1, 2, 3, 4. We can add additional if your contract goes longer than the listed state fiscal years. In the section 6, dollars by fiscal year, for amendments, only enter the amount of the increase or decrease per year, then the total of the amount at the bottom is shown here, $9,840,000. In section 7, you'll want to enter the purpose of the amendment as shown here. And next slide. The next 3 slides will cover how to make changes to certain documents with examples shown of the changes. Now, the scope of work, only if there are changes to the services and the scope of work, please bold and underline the new information, as we said previously, and strike through the information that's removed. This will make the review more efficient and easily identify the changes. Also listed here are lost track here. Also listed here are the competitive bid requirements that we spoke of earlier. To change services on competitively bid contracts, it would have to be anticipated and written into the invitation for bid and request for a proposal. Next slide. Budget summary, also known as Exhibit B, Attachment 1, will follow the same guidelines with the bold and underline and strike through procedure. Per the Budget Bureau, the Excel version needs to be edited to show changes. And also for IT contracts, the PDF version within the contract should include the changes as shown here. Below this, you will see a guideline for amending a competitively bid contract, as mentioned earlier, with the SCM reference to read further into. It's important to watch expenditures closely because you'll want to amend to add funds if the vendor has exceeded their budget. And if this is the case, you'll want to catch it early and as early as possible. Next slide. Here we have budget narrative and budget detail and payment provisions will follow the same guidelines for changes as shown here with the bold and underlining new information and strike through information removed. And we'll go on to the next slide. Submitting an amendment will be the same as submitting the original contract. You will submit a completed Gen 704 with all the applicable documents shown earlier, no later than 90 days prior to the intended start date, to the same inbox the original contract was submitted. Now, the time to process amendments will depend on the changes, and they're typically processed much faster than the original contracts. Next slide. Talk a little bit about budget modifications here. Budget modification language is included within subvention and interagency contracts. A budget modification allows minor shifts in funds between line items of up to 10%. This could be very helpful when wanting to move small portions of funding without doing a full amendment. But the original contract needs to have this language as shown on this next slide to allow for that budget modification. And very important that this cannot increase indirect costs ever. And if it does increase the contract amount, then a formal amendment must be completed. And shown here are the links to where to submit budget modifications for non-IT and non-IT contracts. Next slide. Now, this is an example of the budget modification language from the Exhibit B that will be added by our contract folks, the CFSD. Also shown here is on the right is a request for budget modification form that will be submitted when requesting a budget modification. And next slide. Lastly, these are a few resources listed showing important sections of the SCM regarding amendments, along with great training that involves amendments, and our CCU SharePoint site with our contract information if you have any questions. Next slide. And that completes our training on contract amendments. At this time, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to ask, or our email is always open if you would prefer to ask questions there. We're here to assist you. Thank you.
If there are no questions, I just want to add on that I already talked to a lot of you via Teams or emails. We're here to help. So if you have any questions or you're working on a package or no questions, a dumb question, feel free to shoot us a quick Teams message. Hey, ask us a quick question, get us involved. Like we're here to help. So like I said, a lot of you I already have that communication with. If I don't with some of the others, again, feel free to message us or email us at any time. Big question, small question, doesn't matter. We can help get you through it. For System of Care, SPEIB, and CWS, that would be me. Amelia is CSQMB, FPSSB, and what's the other one?
Thank you, Mitch. I think you got them all.
Oh, and ASP would be Amelia. But yeah, get us involved. Again, reach out, quick Teams chat. Hey, what's this? We can get it to you real quick. But yeah, feel free to message us or ask us anything. We're here.
I echo Jeb's sentiment. I think in the chat, this is the only dumb question is one never asked, and it's true. There's no such thing. The process is very finicky, I'll say, and there's a lot of policies and just red tape we have to get through. So it is better reach out to us. We do have the knowledge, we have the resources to be able to I didn't turn my camera on to help and to get things through a lot quicker too, because typically our packages are well vetted at that point. So if there are no questions, I do have up on the screen, like Jeb just mentioned, the branch assignments. Please do not hesitate to even reach out to me directly via email or to any of the team via email to get anything that you need sorted out. Otherwise, happy Wednesday. We'll stay on for a couple more minutes just in case you all end up with a question, and we'll go from there. Otherwise, have a wonderful
Thank you
day.
all. Thank
Thank
you
you.
all.